Sky News special on tonight's dramatic events in the House of Commons. Theresa May has just suffered the biggest parliamentary defeat of any Prime Minister in modern political history for nearly 100 years. This is what the numbers look like. You just heard the Speaker announcing it. 202 MPs voted for the Prime Minister's Brexit withdrawal agreement. 432, though, voted against. That makes a majority, a round number of 230 against the government, including over 100 of her own MPs. Well, this was the Prime Minister's response.
It is clear that the House does not support this deal, but tonight's vote tells us nothing about what it does support. Nothing about how or even if it intends to honour the decision the British people took in a referendum Parliament decided to hold. First, we need to confirm whether this government still enjoys the confidence of the House. I believe that it does, but given the scale and importance of tonight's vote, it's right that others have the chance to test that question if they wish to do so. I can therefore confirm that if the official opposition table a confidence motion this evening in the form required by the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, the government will make time to debate that motion tomorrow.
Well, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn didn't waste any time in taking up that very invitation.
The result of tonight's vote is the greatest defeat for a government since the 1920s in this House. This is a catastrophic defeat for this government. After 2 years of failed negotiations, the House of Commons has delivered its verdict on her Brexit deal, and that verdict is absolutely decisive. I hear the words of the Prime Minister, but actions of her government of the past 2 years speak equally clearly. The most important issue facing us is that the government has lost the confidence of this House and this country. I therefore, Mr. Speaker, inform you I have now tabled a motion of no confidence in this government.
Well, the leader of the House of Commons, Andrea Leadsom, confirmed that Parliament would debate a motion of confidence in the government tomorrow.
Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that your office has the proposal for a business motion tomorrow that proposes that the debate takes place for the whole day until 7 p.m.
Grateful, thank you.
Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is here with me. So same time, same place tomorrow. A vote of confidence in the government, voting at 7 o'clock, we're here.
Yes, and yet another example of no love lost between the Speaker and Andrea Leadsom.
Little aside there, yeah.
It was one point when she got up, she said, "I'm extraordinarily grateful, Mr. Speaker." I've got confirmation now of which Labour MPs voted with the government. It was Ian Austin, Sir Kevin Barron, John Mann, and then some independents, Frank Field, Birkenhead, Stephen Lloyd, the former Lib Dem, Lady Herman from Northern Ireland as well. We're also hearing a couple of PPSs have quit because they voted against the government. Eddie Hughes, his PPS to DEXU ministers, he's the MP who snatched Walsall North from the veteran David Winnick in the last year's general election. Craig Tracy, Warwickshire North, and he is a PPS to Michael Gove, I believe. So a bit of a fallout, but these are minor figures. What is interesting is that the scale of the defeat, really. The Labour Party, in their briefing after what's happened this evening, have just produced a little graph, actually, and you have to go back to Ramsay MacDonald. He suffered defeats of 166, 161 and 140 during that minority. It was a minority Labour government, wasn't it? Yes.
I should say we've got Professor Clark with us, keeping us on the straight and narrow when it comes to facts like that.
Phone
John.
a friend. Yeah. 230. I mean, it dwarfs those. And then you get to Jim Callaghan suffered one of 86, Harold Wilson 83, Stanley Baldwin 77 and 72, and then David Cameron in 2014 a defeat of 75. So it just shows the scale, as Labour are pointing out, much bigger than anything else in the 20th or 21st century.
OK, our editor-at-large, Adam Bolton, is in Downing Street for us tonight. And it's the eternal question, Adam, now, is what happens now? What could possibly get us out of this pickle?
Well, the Prime Minister has said that she is going to reach out and consult, but the briefing we're getting from Number 10 suggests that that's going to be a fairly limited reaching out, because she said she's going to talk to people who share her same vision of international trade. Now, that's code basically for saying she's not going to talk to people who want Britain to stay in a customs union, and that, of course, includes most of the opposition parties, the Labour Party. She's also saying she's going to talk to people who are now advocating no deal. Well, that's very much on the Conservative side, again, of the consultations. Mrs May is now back in Downing Street. She went in through the back entrance. Going in through the front entrance, we've seen the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond, and also Stephen Barclay, the Brexit Secretary. So the first target, of course, is to get through tomorrow, and that basically involves appeasing the Democratic Unionists and also Conservative MPs, so there's a maximum Conservative DUP vote to ensure that the government actually survives that no-confidence motion tabled by Jeremy Corbyn. But thereafter, as I say, Mrs May says she's going to reach out, but that's not going as far as we know the pro-Europeans in her cabinet would like her to go. They are sympathetic towards this idea of a so-called indicative vote, where the various options facing the UK are debated and voted on to get some idea of the mood across the House. No sign, frankly, from the Prime Minister yet that she wants to reach out that far. She wants to carry on really trying to fine-tune this withdrawal agreement that was rejected so massively tonight. Also, interesting signals coming out of the European Union. We've got the President of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, saying that time is running out, and a sort of rather ambiguous tweet from Donald Tusk, the President of the Council, saying, well, if you don't want this deal and you don't want no deal, when will someone in the UK have the courage to say what would be the positive solution? Now, we know in a previous comment he said, you may say I'm a dreamer, but he would like the UK to decide to remain. So it seems at the moment that even as Mrs May, in defeat, tries to focus on her withdrawal agreement, that the radical alternatives, if you like, no-deal Brexit, or indeed the whole idea of staying in the European Union, are still very much in the minds of other politicians, both here and across the English Channel.
Uncharted waters. Adam, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts.
Good evening from Westminster, where the House of Commons, a short while ago, delivered a crushing defeat on the Brexit agreement negotiated by Theresa May. With 432 MPs voting against, it was the biggest government defeat on record, the biggest Conservative rebellion to boot, while just 202 voted for the withdrawal agreement offered by the Prime Minister. That's a very substantial defeat by 230 votes for that current deal that was offered. Government will now face a motion of no confidence in the Commons tomorrow, tabled by the Labour Party. The Prime Minister says that if the government survives that vote, she will come to Parliament on Monday with a new proposal to take the Brexit process forward. The UK is due to leave the European Union on the 29th of March. First tonight, our political editor Laura Kuensberg reports on that vote and the government defeat.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
No ordinary defeat, no ordinary times.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock!
Gasps from MPs, sharp intakes of breath. They don't begin to cover it.
The noes to the left, 432.
A grave moment. But celebration outside. How can the Prime Minister move on when her main mission has suffered the biggest defeat for a century?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
MPs had to be shushed to hear her.
The House has spoken and the government will listen. It is clear that the House does not support this deal, but tonight's vote tells us nothing about what it does support. Nothing about how or even if it intends to honour the decision the British people took in a referendum Parliament decided to hold. If the House confirms its confidence in this government, I will then hold meetings with my colleagues, our confidence and supply partner, the DUP, and senior parliamentarians from across the House to identify what would be required to secure the backing of the House. The government will approach these meetings in a constructive spirit, but given the urgent need to make progress, we must focus on ideas that are genuinely negotiable and have sufficient support in this House. Every day that passes without this issue being resolved means more uncertainty, more bitterness and more rancour. The government has heard what the House has said tonight, but I ask members on all sides of the House to listen to the British people who want this issue settled and to work with the government to do just that.
No signal really of a major change of direction. No surprise, Labour will use this moment of danger to push for a vote to collapse the government.
This is a catastrophic defeat for this government. After 2 years of failed negotiations, the House of Commons has delivered its verdict on her Brexit deal, and that verdict is absolutely decisive. She cannot seriously believe that after 2 years of failure, she is capable of negotiating a good deal for the people of this country. The most important issue facing us is that the government has lost the confidence of this House and this country. I therefore, Mr. Speaker, inform you I have now tabled a motion of no confidence in this government. And I'm pleased that motion will be debated tomorrow, so this House can give its verdict on the sheer incompetence of this government and pass that motion of no confidence in the government.
The Prime Minister whisked back to Downing Street, where she'll plan how to fight that tomorrow. Neither she nor her ministers were expecting a result as bad as this.
We've heard a lot from people about what they're opposed to. We've heard very little from people about what they're actually in favour of. People are saying they want to uphold the result of the referendum, but they're not saying actually what they want to vote for.
The Prime Minister will discuss with her own backbenchers, with the DUP and with other opposition parties to find the way forward that is potentially negotiable with the EU.
The crowd might not want it. The government is likely to survive the vote tomorrow.
Absolutely brilliant. I hope May gets the sack now.
It's time really to put Brexit in the bin.
Delighted. I couldn't be happier. I believe democracy has been served tonight.
The deal is horrendous. The question really is what happens next.
Well, there's no shortage of big voices lining up to tell her what.
What she needs to do is, with a high heart, fortified by, the massive rejection of the House of Commons, go back to our friends and partners and say, look, we need another way out of this.
She now needs to set aside any pre-conditions she has, if you like, of what she thinks is the route forward, and now appreciate that actually, in asking MPs, perhaps we can find a consensus.
The significance of this is I think that this is the beginning of the end of Brexit.
Let's go back to the European Union, make it clear to them this deal is not going to work, and they have to come up with a deal which reflects a change on the difficulties which caused her to lose this vote tonight.
The plan has to be to put it back to the electorate. Parliament's not suddenly going to manage to solve the conundrum that it's failed to solve in the last 2.5 years.
All of those fine words, perhaps, but guess what? None of them agree. That's the Prime Minister, number 10, and the Cabinet's nightmare after more than 2 years of argument.
Take care. Yeah, bye.
Remember, this deal was hard fought in the inner sanctums of the EU. They're frustrated too.
Now it's time for the UK to tell us the next steps. And on our side, we will remain united and determined to reach a deal.
Do you trust Theresa May? Can she do it?
The Prime Minister hasn't just lost, her plan's been crushed by an accidental alliance that doesn't agree. But the government, let alone Theresa May, shows no sign of packing up yet.
And Laura is with me now outside Parliament. Well, nobody foresaw really the scale of this, did they? So where does it leave us?
Well, it's certainly worse than the government imagined. There's no question about that. And there's also no doubt that the government is extremely frustrated about what has happened here. We saw that in the House of Commons today. You know, the Attorney General, senior member of the government, pointing the finger at Tory MPs behind him, saying, what are you doing? The irony that many people in government believe here is that people who campaign for Brexit are trying to disrupt the Prime Minister's version of it. And there is deep unease in government about the fact that they have sweated and struggled to find a way through it. They think it's the only credible one and no one else has got a better idea. And there's real concern that none of the rival tribes in Parliament have got a plan that would get anything like the kind of consensus that is needed to get through the House of Commons. But the fact is, the Prime Minister, wherever she lands, whatever she seizes on next, has to get this through Parliament in order for this to happen. So, her alternatives, talk to other members of different political parties. She says she'll do that. But there's no sign that she's willing to junk her whole plan. It seems she wants to look at tweaks rather than radical changes. But right now, Parliament isn't just a hurdle that she fell over on the first attempt. It seems like a brick wall. And her critics think that she does have to do something much more than a few nips and tucks here and there around the place in order to have a real chance of getting anything like a compromise through that place.
Good evening from Westminster on a highly charged night that has already earned its place as a significant milestone in the history of this country. Quite where it leaves Theresa May, her government, MPs in general, and indeed all of the rest of us, there's a much more open question. It is true that the defeat was widely predicted, but we've all seen Prime Ministers defy the odds here before. Not tonight, not by the longest shot. The raw numbers are bad enough. A defeat of 230 votes, the worst in history. But throw in the fact that this was her defining purpose in office, and you get a sense of the scale of the humiliation. In normal times, you would expect a Prime Minister to come out into Downing Street any moment now to resign. But these are not normal times. And even the Prime Minister's critics would be hard pushed to say what purpose that would serve. The Labour leader responded by calling a no-confidence vote, which is likely to take place tomorrow. She will almost certainly survive it. We will do our best tonight to try and map a path through this fog. But first, here is Robert's account of perhaps the most impactful parliamentary vote of the modern age.
It was a vote that would shape our future for years to come.
202. The noes to the left, 432.
And she was utterly humiliated, suffering the worst defeat on an important policy of any government in more than 100 years.
Point of order, the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the House has spoken and the government will listen. It is clear that the House does not support this deal, but tonight's vote tells us nothing about what it does support.
Theresa May said she'd now sound out her partners in government, Northern Ireland's DUP and other senior parliamentarians from all parties, to see if a different version of Brexit could command their support, and then she'd see if the European Union would agree to that revised plan to leave the EU.
Every day that passes without this issue being resolved means more uncertainty, more bitterness and more rancour. The government has heard what the House has said tonight, but I ask members on all sides of the House to listen to the British people who want this issue settled and to work with the government to do just that.
But there's a huge hurdle for her tomorrow.
The most important issue facing us is that the government has lost the confidence of this House and this country. I therefore, Mr. Speaker, inform you I have now tabled a motion of no confidence in this government. And I'm pleased that motion will be debated tomorrow, so this House can give its verdict on the sheer incompetence of this government.
In normal circumstances, when a Prime Minister loses a vote of this magnitude, he or she quits. Why isn't the Prime Minister quitting?
Well, these are not normal times, and the Prime Minister has the confidence of the party, and I very much hope and believe tomorrow we'll see that she has the confidence of the Commons. She is the best placed person to find a Brexit deal that can get through the House of Commons.
It was a historic day, and these are historic photos taken on MPs' smartphones, rebels trooping through the lobbies to destroy the PM's deal, including Boris Johnson and arguably the most senior of Tory backbenchers, chair of their 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady. The writing was on the wall when MP after MP from all parties turned against the Prime Minister, such as the former Minister Owen Paterson.
This is a betrayal of what the people voted for.
A Labour MP, Lisa Nandy, who had wanted to back Brexit.
We are playing with fire here. We are breaking our democracy.
And a May loyalist, Sir Hugo Swire.
It is with a heavy heart that I shall not be supporting the government this evening.
So does one of the architects of Brexit have no regrets for his role in killing the PM's version of Brexit?
This deal is finished, it's over, it's dead. We need a new deal, a better deal, and it's, I think, there to be done. She needs to go back and get something that really allows us to take advantage of Brexit.
Even after the voting shock, there's no love lost between Tories, as the champion of a referendum, Anna Soubry, made clear.
We'll have people like Boris Johnson going around talking a whole load of nonsense about being able to find some magic deal that will get through the Commons. He's talking crap. Sorry, but we've got everybody now has got to be proper grown-ups and responsible, and they've got to put their national interest first. And the national interest is the only way is to get it back to the British people and let them decide.
So how likely is it that the Prime Minister will tomorrow lose that confidence motion? Well, Northern Ireland's DUP, one of the architects of her big flop today, says tomorrow it will stand by her.
Now that we have managed to defeat the withdrawal agreement with its toxic backstop, it would be entirely wrong for us now to bring the government down.
A very odd alliance, which explains the Prime Minister's disaster. Cheers at her failure from those who want what they think of as a truer Brexit and those who want no Brexit at all. Home tonight for a Prime Minister who survived many previous flops, but none perhaps as big as tonight's. Robert Peston, News at 10.
Well, let's rewind a bit now to the details of that vote earlier in the evening. In total, only 202 MPs supported the Prime Minister's deal, while more than twice as many, 432, opposed it. It means the government was defeated by an unprecedented 230 votes. Those voting against her plan included 118 of her own party. If you take out all the MPs who have government jobs, the so-called payroll vote, she only managed to persuade around 70 of her backbench MPs to support her, a dismal number by any standards. And despite the government's efforts to draw support from Labour MPs, just 3 backed her tonight. Well, the fallout from those figures is still being felt around here at Westminster, and of course Robert is here with us to talk about this. Look, let's be blunt, millions of people all over the country will be tearing their hair out in frustration at all this. What happens next, in your view?
Look, this was an almost unprecedented catastrophe for any Prime Minister. It gives the lie that the problem with the deal was just that so-called backstop, that provision that Northern Ireland's DUP feared would drive a wedge between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. MP's criticism went far wider than that. Her fundamental problem was that she never set out and sold a vision of the UK's future relationship with the EU. Now, I have been talking to my sources on the other side of the channel in EU governments, and they cannot come up with any version of Brexit that she could now put to them, despite the fact that she's going to sort of negotiate with senior parliamentarians, that they could agree to. And therefore tonight, Tom, I think we are in a chilling position that more than 2 years after we voted to leave the EU, we are looking at what some people would regard as the worst version of Brexit, a no-deal Brexit, which many people would say would do serious damage to our economy, or no Brexit at all. The Prime Minister is refusing to come to that conclusion right now, but frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if in a week or two she herself had to make a choice between no Brexit or a hard no-deal Brexit.
OK, it is a miserable position indeed. Well, Robert is going to stay with us, and we will be back to talk to him later in the programme because, let's face it, there is an enormous amount to chew over. Now, events in the Commons were, of course, being watched very closely in Brussels, so closely that tweets from Jean-Claude Juncker and Donald Tusk were posted within minutes. Perhaps they expected the result. Now, our Europe editor, James Mates, is in Brussels tonight. James, you know, we've talked about this often enough. Only last night you were saying it kind of depends what the defeat is. What's been the reaction today?
Well, I mean, you said they were expecting the result. They weren't obviously expecting it to be this bad. And in many ways, it does change things because now small tweaks, small compromises, even those aren't going to get this deal through the Commons. So they are thinking again. And the common theme across Europe tonight is, look, you've told us in no uncertain terms what you don't want. Please tell us what you do want. And the tweets tonight, Donald Tusk, the council president, said if a deal is impossible and no one wants no deal, then we'll find who will finally have the courage to say what the only positive solution is. No secret there. He thinks that solution should be no Brexit. Jean-Claude Juncker, I note with regret the outcome of the vote in the Commons this evening. I urge the UK to clarify its intentions. Time is almost up. And from the European Parliament's point man on Brexit, Guy Verhofstadt, a reason why they do still want to get on with this.
What we don't want is that this mess in British politics is now transferred and imported in European politics. So let's try to find a solution before the European elections.
One thing that does seem to be changing here is the view of extending Article 50. There was a time quite recently when they thought that it was concentrating mines in London. Now it's clear that having to have a complete rethink. There simply isn't time for that. So we are talking probably about an extension to maybe the 1st of July, maybe longer if what Britain wants to do is hold either a general election or a second referendum. But crucially, under the rules, Britain has to ask for that before it can be granted.
OK, James, well, for now, thank you very much. Well, for their final thoughts, I'm joined by our political editor, Robert, of course, and Professor Jane Green, who has been our companion on so many long referendum and election nights, I'm sure you will recall. Robert, maybe I could start with you just for a moment. What do you, I mean, is no deal off the table now in your view because the Parliament won't accept it? Where do you think we are?
Well, look, there is this initiative being taken by backbenchers led by Nick Bowles and Oliver Letwin, which might, in about 10 days' time, effectively take it off the table. But I want to tell you a different story. I want to tell you a story about how these events concerning Brexit could lead to the breakup of both parties. In order to get a deal through Parliament, she will almost certainly have to go for a softer Brexit that would woo a body of Labour MPs. Now, were she to do that, Tory MPs like Jacob Rees-Mogg, you were just talking to, and there are many like-minded Tory MPs, might well feel this was no longer a Tory party they could remain part of. So that is the pressure that she faces there, the risk of the breakup of a Tory party. Now, Jeremy Corbyn, you were asking his colleague Richard Bergen whether Jeremy Corbyn would go for a referendum. Now, a majority of Labour voters, a majority probably of Labour MPs, want a referendum, or at least a very, very soft Brexit. Now, if Jeremy Corbyn does not show leadership in the direction of a referendum, then that might lead, in fact, in my view, that would lead to the breakup of the Labour Party. So both parties extraordinarily fragile tonight.
OK. Jane, this is a great moment to talk to you, as we so often do on these long nights, about where you think mood is shifting. I mean, let's just begin with the referendum. What do you think voters? Has anyone changed their mind in your view?
This is the most fascinating moment, and yet we see a lot of stability in terms of public opinion in a very volatile context. So we see a volatile electorate, we see volatility in Parliament, in our government, in our political times, and yet we see at the moment stability in public opinion, a bit of a shift towards Remain, but nothing that's providing a really strong signal for parliamentarians to follow.
Do you think if there was another referendum, Leave would win again?
Everything depends, Tom, on what is on a ballot paper on the referendum. What we've learnt today is that if there were to be a second referendum, then Theresa May's deal is not going to be on that ballot paper. So that would be the big question. If it's a case of whether it's Remain or no deal, then I think there was a good chance that Remain might win against those odds within these, the current kind of climate of public opinion. But we don't know what would be on that
and just
ballot paper.
Lastly and briefly, Robert's apocalyptic predictions there. another election seems a possibility. What do you think the public reaction to that would be, briefly?
Absolutely staggering. I mean, here we are. We had a general election in 2015, a general election in 2017.
Yeah.
If we have one in 2019, then there'll be consternation. But much more seriously than that, how do the public respond? How do the parties respond? How do the public respond? They've shown that they might do things that we don't expect them to do.
It's a big question for tomorrow and the days after. Now, we have seen many dramatic days here at Westminster in recent times, but even so, today was quite something. Defeat, yes, sure, but not as we have known it. The Prime Minister is back in Downing Street tonight, the very definition of the term embattled. She fights on, she fights to win, her dwindling band of supporters might say, but how and when, and even, she might ask in her darker moments, why? Tomorrow she faces that vote of no confidence, and after that she's only 3 days to come back to the Commons here with her plan B. And meanwhile, the rest of us here in Westminster, around the country, all across the world, can only look on as this once proud country veers dangerously towards the status of international laughingstock. Brexit was never going to be easy. There were many honest arguments on both sides, and yes, some dishonest ones too. But 2 years in, one can surely say this: we have not the faintest clue where we are going. And that's it for tonight. I will be here tomorrow night for the next chapter in this extraordinary story. But for now, good night, and thank you for watching.